Wake up, cook, care, clean, repeat. A never-ending cycle of conforming to society's standards and not overstepping the line drawn between men and women's duties. This was the way women lived in the time before the start of the Civil War in 1861. They were seen as hollow bodies only good for one thing: labor. With hands always bearing the weight of their families and silenced voices carrying away locked knowledge, women went about their lives as overlooked and marginalized beings, underappreciated by society. All over the United States, hospitals were gory scenes filled with disease and death. There were no proper sanitary precautions taken, making infection common among all patients. Hospitals were understaffed and dirty, often lacking order and cleanness. The Civil War lasted from April 1861 to April 1865, a time period filled with bloody battles and a fight for freedom. This bloody time brought a sudden need for medical staff to tend to the thousands of wounded soldiers and civilians. Previously, women had rarely practiced medicine publicly and stuck to doing the work inside the house, such as chores and performing small medicinal tasks to care for their families. Women in the North became nurses out of compassion, need for excitement and independence, to meet their loved ones, or for money, while women in the South were often forced to become nurses when their homes were turned into makeshift hospitals. With that being said, many women were personally inspired by Florence Nightingale for building the world's first nursing school in 1860, bringing in a new wave of determined nurses.
Before the war began, nursing was viewed solely as a male profession, as women were perceived to be too delicate for such a harsh job. Many people believed women to be too weak and inexperienced to face the rigorous challenges of the war, and even said that refined ladies shouldn't be exposed to the horrors of the war. Some men opposed the idea of women nurses entirely, saying that women would faint at the sight of horrible wounds and they shouldn't be exposed to naked male bodies. On the battlefields, women faced discrimination from soldiers, male doctors, and even military officers. To contribute to the war efforts, women in the North organized local aid societies to collect funds and materials for Union troops. In 1861, these societies merged to form organizations such as the United States Sanitary Commission. The U.S. Sanitary Commission was created by Abraham Lincoln to develop training programs for nurses and to make Union conditions more sanitary. By 1863, it had 7,000 affiliated organizations and tens of thousands of women volunteers. These nurse volunteers raised money for the camps and sent food, medicine, and clothing to soldiers. Also, they fed soldiers, cleaned, and wrote letters for those who couldn't write their own. The USSC trained women to be nurses, sent them to where there was a high demand for medical staff, and sent inspectors to camps to make suggestions on how to improve the cleanliness and living conditions there. While this was going on in the North, the women in the South faced larger challenges. Many Southern women were forced to give up their homes to become hospitals, and due to most of the fighting taking place in the South, these hospitals were constantly being moved around by the nurses themselves. The majority of women joined the Confederate Army Medical Service because of the law passed by the Confederate Congress in September 1862, allowing civilian nurses to work in Army hospitals. Some nurses even risked their lives to stay and protect patients who couldn't be relocated during nearby battles. In the end, although Northern women had more resources and better conditions than Southern women, nurses of both sides worked equally as hard to fulfill their responsibilities. It wasn't just society that discouraged women from becoming nurses. Doctors did as well. Even in their desperate state, they didn't want to accept any help from women because of their own sexism and male superiority beliefs. Some doctors complained that women were unaware of the social hierarchy of power and authority in the military. Dr. John H. Brinton, the physician in charge in the Union base at Cairo, Illinois, said, "On the arrival of certain trains, they would stalk into the office of district commanders and establish themselves solemnly against the walls, entrenched behind their bags and parcels. They defied all military law. There they were, and there they would stay until some accommodation might be found for them. To him at last these wretched females would come. They did not wish much, not they, simply a room, a bed, a looking-glass, someone to get their meals and do little things for them, and they would nurse the sick boys of our gallant Union Army." He, along with the majority of male hospital workers, thought that women were only burdening the army with extra mouths to feed and bodies to house. Sadly, this conflict between doctors and female nurses was not resolved until well into the war.
Clara Barton, Mary Bickerdike, Dorothy Dix, Mary Walker, and Elizabeth Blackwell all played a significant part in the Civil War. The founder of the American Red Cross and nicknamed Angel of the Battlefield, Clara Barton was one of the most known and impactful nurses during the Civil War. She was one of the first to volunteer at the Washington Infirmary to care for wounded soldiers. Throughout the war, Clara Barton traveled with her supply wagons across the nation, helping the Union Army and the Confederate prisoners. In addition to this, she established the Office of Correspondence with Friends of the Missing Men of the United States Army to help families find missing soldiers, became one of the first female clerks in the United States Patient Office in the Washington, D.C., and monitored the distribution of important medicine to Union troops. Overall, Clara's contributions to the Civil War are endless, and that is reflected on her reputation that still stands today.
Mary Ann Bickerdike, born in 1817, was an ambitious and stubborn lady who prided herself on her cleanliness and knowledge of nursing. She was known for walking into hospitals unannounced, deeming them unfit for health care, and beginning organized deep cleans. She was able to single-handedly force men who believed they were above manual labor to get on their hands and knees and clean. She was given the name Calico Cyclone for her whirlwind cleanings, and when she was questioned by doctors as to where she was given the power to do so, she said, "From the Lord God Almighty."
Dorothy Dix was a disciplined and hardworking woman ever since she was born in 1802. At just 19 years old in 1821, Dorothy opened an all-girls school in Boston where she went to teach for the next 9 years. Sometime later, she returned and became an advocate for conditions and treatment of the patients in mental asylums. Dorothy Dix pushed the Union to form an official women's nursing bureau and developed a salary for these women. She was also the head of the bureau. She was then appointed Superintendent of Army Nurses for Civil War services. Here she set a high bar of standards for nurses with her strict leadership style. After the war, she continued to work in hospitals until she grew ill. She ended up dying July 17, 1887, in a hospital that she founded herself.
Dr. Mary Walker, a 29-year-old qualified doctor, was determined to become an official military officer. She marched into a hospital in Chattanooga dressed as an assistant surgeon because she knew they were in need of one. However, the medical director of the Army of the Cumberland wouldn't accept a woman in this male-affiliated position. Despite this rejection, she continued to act as an assistant surgeon, unpaid and unrecognized. After a few months, she received a check from the U.S. government with no explanation. It turns out she had been paid for the 4 months she was an undeclared assistant surgeon, and this is how she found out she was officially in the U.S. Army. Her determination and resilience inspired many women to challenge the norm of gender-associated positions and broaden their work field.
Elizabeth Blackwell's parents believed that a good education was priority, so she received one through private tutoring and hard work. Her family was involved in abolitionist and women's rights movements while they were in New York, and she vowed that one day she would make the world a better place by becoming a nurse. There were few medical colleges at the time, but none of them accepted women, and she was rejected from every school she applied to. During the Civil War, she and her sisters helped train nurses for the Union, and she saw this as an opportunity to professionalize and gain respect for the position. Blackwell was the first woman to graduate and obtain a medical degree from a U.S. medical college. Her work contributed to the establishment of the U.S. Sanitary Commission and inspired many women to become nurses.
While the Civil War as a whole may not be viewed as a joyful matter, it permanently changed women's roles in society for the better. It gained momentum for women's rights movements, developed nursing as a respectable profession rather than just a practice, and cleared the stigma of women being the so-called weaker sex. By defying pre-war gender stereotypes, traditional gender norms blurred and society's views on women's capabilities changed. The false belief that women were too delicate to work in nursing fields was abolished, and the profession opened up to both men and women. Women were able to broaden career choices, enter the workforce, and publicize their hard work, grit, and determination. In the end, doctors and nurses were able to settle their differences and developed greater mutual respect for one another.
Despite the early skepticism of the surgeons and the general public about the propriety as well as the ability of women to serve as nurses during the Civil War, some 3,000 women showed the world that they had stamina, the commitment, the organizational abilities, and the talent to become a vital force in the nation.
Women of the American Civil War.